The rain was relentless that evening, streaking across the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Seattle office like tears the city couldn't hold back. It was 7:45 p.m., and the glow of my laptop screen was the only light left on the 14th floor. I was deep in the final draft of a compliance clause for a $25 million renewable energy contract, the kind of deal that could power entire communities, the kind I'd poured my soul into for over a year. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was the silence behind it, the cowardice. They didn't call me into a meeting, didn't look me in the eye, didn't even pretend to value the year I'd given them. They wanted me to keep showing up, keep smiling, keep working, while they quietly phased me out. It was a tactic I'd heard about in whispers at industry conferences, quiet cutting, they called it. A way to push people out without the mess of a layoff, without the accountability. In that moment, I felt like a ghost, still haunting the office, but no longer seen, no longer real. I closed my eyes and let the rain's rhythm steady my breathing. Seattle had always been my home, its gray skies and coffee shops a backdrop to my ambition. I'd moved here after college, drawn to the city's promise of innovation, its tech giants and green energy startups. I'd imagined myself building a career that mattered, one that could change lives. This contract was supposed to be my legacy, a deal that would bring clean energy to thousands of homes. I'd fought for it, not for a bonus or a corner office, but because I believed in what we were doing. I believed in the team, in the mission, in the people who stood beside me. Or so I thought. The name Nathan Brooks flickered in my mind, sharp and unwelcome. He was the new executive who'd been circling my project for months, always smiling a little too brightly, asking for updates I knew he didn't need. I'd thought he was learning, maybe even admiring my work. I'd been generous, sharing my notes, letting him take the spotlight in meetings because I believed we were a team. Now, that generosity felt like naivety. Was he behind this email? Had he been waiting for the deal to near completion before pushing me out? The thought stung, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions, not yet. I needed to think, to breathe, to decide who I was going to be when I walked into the office tomorrow. I reopened the email, forcing myself to face it again. The words hadn't changed, but something in me had. The shock was giving way to a quiet resolve, a spark of defiance. They thought they could erase me, but they didn't know the whole story. This contract, this $25 million deal, wasn't just a stack of papers. It was mine, every clause, every deadline, every handshake with the client. I was the one they trusted, the one who'd spent a year building bridges across continents. And there was something they didn't know, something buried in the fine print of my work. Only I had the authority to finalize the compliance documents, the last piece needed to sign the deal. They could cut my pay, but they couldn't cut me out. Not yet. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. The city below was a blur of lights, each one a story, a dream, a fight. I wasn't ready to fade into the background. I wasn't ready to let this betrayal define me. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the office with my head high, my blazer pressed, my smile steady. They'd think I was obedient, maybe wounded, but they'd be wrong. I was Lauren Carter, and I was just getting started. If you're reading this, I want you to pause for a moment. Think about a time you felt undervalued, overlooked, or pushed aside. Maybe it was a job, a relationship, a dream you poured your heart into, only to have it dismissed. Write it down, not for anyone else but for you. Let those words remind you of your worth, your strength, your ability to rise. Because here's the truth. No one can take away what you've built inside yourself. They can try to dim your light, but they can't extinguish it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, crafting words that felt like the last brushstrokes on a masterpiece. Then, a soft chime broke my focus. An email. I glanced at the notification, expecting a routine update from the Tokyo team or a client question about timelines. Instead, the subject line was blank, and the sender was a generic HR alias. I clicked it open, and the world I'd built tilted on its axis. And as I stood there, watching Seattle's rain paint the night, I knew one thing for certain. My light was still burning, and it was about to shine brighter than ever. Effective immediately, your salary's reduced by 35%. No greeting, no explanation, No signature. Just those 9 words, cold and final, staring back at me like a stranger in my inbox. I read them again, then a third time, as if repetition could rewrite the truth. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier disbelief laced with betrayal. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd turned a shaky pitch into a $25 million deal, who'd memorized every client quirk, who'd stayed late while the office emptied, night after night. And now, this? A 35% pay cut delivered at 7:45 p.m.? As if they hoped I'd miss it in the blur of my work? I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. Outside, Seattle's skyline shimmered through the Rainpike Place's neon signs, the Space Needle piercing the clouds, a city alive and moving while I sat frozen. The cursor on my screen blinked, steady and indifferent, mocking the chaos in my head. I'd always believed in the American dream, the one drilled into us from childhood. Work hard, show up, be indispensable, and you'll be safe. I'd bought into it completely. I'd answered calls from London at 3 a.m., smoothed over cultural missteps with Tokyo executives, and spent weekends perfecting slides that made our clients nod in approval. This contract wasn't just a job. It was proof that I could build something lasting, something that mattered. And yet, here I was, staring at an email that said none of it was enough. The office was silent now, the hum of keyboards and the chatter of colleagues long gone. I hadn't noticed them leave, hadn't noticed the hours slip away while I chased perfection. My coffee cup sat cold on the desk, a faint ring of brown staining the coaster. I reached for it, then stopped, my hand trembling midair. Even that small motion felt foreign, like I was no longer anchored in my own body. Who was I if not the woman who'd carried this project through every storm? Who was I if the people I'd trusted could erase 35% of my worth with a single sentence? The rain had stopped by the time I left the office that night, but the air in Seattle still carried a damp chill, clinging to my coat as I stepped onto the slick pavement of Pine Street. The city hummed around metaxis weaving through traffic, the faint clatter of dishes from a nearby restaurant, the glow of the Space Needle cutting through the fog. I'd grown up in a small town outside Seattle, where trust was currency, where people meant what they said. I carried that into my career, assuming the people I worked with shared the same code. But corporate Seattle wasn't my hometown, and Nathan wasn't a neighbor borrowing a cup of sugar. He was playing a different game, one I hadn't even realized I was in. The emotional weight of that year hit me as I crossed the Fremont Bridge, the city's lights reflecting off the water below. I'd given more than time to this project. I'd given pieces of myself. Every late night, every solved crisis, every client smile was a brick in a foundation I thought was mine. I remembered the first major client meeting, held via video from a Tokyo boardroom. I'd prepped for days, memorizing market trends, anticipating questions. My slides were flawless, my answers ready. But when Nathan, newly promoted, joined the call, he leaned in and said, "Lauren, you've done the heavy lifting. Mind if I take this one?" His voice was warm, disarming. I hesitated, then nodded. "Go for it," I said, believing it was a moment of teamwork. He stumbled through my slides, misquoted a statistic, but recovered with a laugh that charmed the room. The client signed off, and I felt proud, not of myself, but of us. "Good team," Nathan said later, clapping my shoulder. I wanted to believe him. Now, standing on that bridge, the memory felt hollow. I'd been so focused on the work, so sure it would speak for itself, that I hadn't seen what was coming. The email wasn't just a pay cut. It was a signal that my trust had been misplaced, that the team I'd believed in had been quietly reshaping the story. My salary was slashed, but it was my faith and fairness that took the deeper hit. I'd poured my heart into this contract, not for a bonus or a title, but because I believed it mattered. I believed I mattered. And yet, here I was, staring into the dark water below, wondering if I'd been a fool. But even in that moment, something stirred inside me, a spark of clarity. Small but fierce. The project wasn't just a job. It was mine, built on my sweat, my sleepless nights, my ability to turn chaos into order. No email could erase that. And there was something else, something they didn't know. The client trusted me, not Nathan, not the faceless HR alias. I was the one who'd handwritten the final compliance notes, the ones required for the contract signing. They could cut my pay, but they couldn't cut my power. Not yet. I turned away from the bridge, my steps steadier now, and headed home. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the office, not as the woman they'd tried to diminish, but as Lauren Carter, the one who'd built this deal from the ground up. If you're reading this, take a moment. Think about a time you gave everything to something, a job, a goal, a dream only, to feel it didn't matter. Write down one thing you did that no one can take away. One moment where your work shone. Hold on to it. That's your truth, your foundation. Mine was a year of building. And as I walked through Seattle's quiet streets, I knew one thing. I wasn't done building yet. But inside, I was still reeling from that email. Those 9 words that had sliced through a year of my life like a knife. Effective immediately, your salary is reduced by 35%. As I walked, my mind drifted back, not to the betrayal, but to the work that had defined me, the work I'd believed would shield me from something like this. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd built a $25 million renewable energy contract from nothing, and that truth, at least, no one could take away. It started 13 months ago, in a cramped conference room overlooking Puget Sound. The project was a long-shot proposal to bring clean energy to rural communities, pitched to a skeptical client in Tokyo. I wasn't the obvious choice to lead it. I was 32, a project manager with a solid but unflashy record, not the kind of person who commanded boardrooms with charisma or connections. But I had something else: grit and a stubborn belief that details could change the world. When the client's email landed in my inbox, requesting a feasibility study by week's end, I didn't hesitate. I stayed up 3 nights straight, poring over data, mapping grid capacities, and drafting a 40-page report that made the impossible sound achievable. The client said yes, and that was the spark that lit everything. From there, it was a marathon. I became the thread, holding the project together, stitching across continents and time zones. I'd wake at 4 a.m. to join calls with Tokyo, my voice steady despite the coffee jitters, translating technical jargon into terms that bridged cultural gaps. I learned to pronounce the client's lead negotiator's name with the exact inflection she preferred, a small gesture that earned her trust. When London's legal team pushed back on our timelines, I flew across the Atlantic, jet-lagged but sharp, and spent 12 hours in a glass-walled office smoothing egos and rewriting clauses. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because I believed in the work. Clean energy wasn't just a contract. It was a promise to families who'd never had reliable power. I believed in the team too. Or at least I thought I did. Looking back, I see how naive I was, how deeply I'd bought into the myth that hard work would be enough. In America, we're raised on that idea. Show up early, stay late, go the extra mile, and you'll be seen, valued, maybe not celebrated, but at least secure. I lived it like gospel. I organized virtual team-building events to keep morale high, a digital escape room that had our Tokyo and Seattle teams laughing together, despite the 16-hour time difference. I spent weekends tweaking slide decks, ensuring every graph was clear, every number precise. When a junior analyst made a mistake in a risk model, I stayed late to fix it, not to shame her, but to protect the project. I thought I was building something unbreakable, a legacy that would speak for itself. I thought I was indispensable. That belief blinded me to the cracks forming around me. I didn't notice how the office dynamics shifted when Nathan Brooks arrived, his polished suits and easy charm filling rooms I'd once anchored with quiet competence. I didn't question why he asked for my project notes, why he lingered in meetings, smiling just a bit too long. I told myself we were a team, that my role as the project's backbone was enough. The Seattle morning was crisp, the kind of autumn day where the air smelled of pine and possibility. I stood outside my office building on 3rd Avenue, clutching a coffee from a Pike Place vendor, its warmth seeping through the paper cup. The city buzz street musicians strumming near the market, ferries gliding across Puget Sound, but inside me, a storm lingered. That email from 2 nights ago, the one slashing my salary by 35%, still echoed in my mind. I hesitated. Something in me bristled, but the room was watching, and I'd been raised to be a team player. In my small-town Seattle upbringing, you shared the harvest, not the glory. So I smiled, handed him the clicker, and said, "Make it count." He fumbled at first, mispronouncing the client's lead negotiator's name Hiroko. Not Hiroko, a detail I'd memorized months ago. He misquoted a cost projection, off by $2 million, but he laughed it off, his charm smoothing the edges. The board laughed too. And by the end, they were nodding, signing off on the next phase. Nathan turned to me as the call ended, his grin wide. "We're a good team, Lauren." I wanted to believe it. I told myself the win was ours, that my slides, my prep had carried the day. But deep down, a quiet unease stirred. Why had he needed to lead? And why hadn't he mentioned my work? That unease grew as Nathan's shadow lengthened. He started joining client calls, summarizing my updates in his polished baritone, as if I'd merely handed him raw material. He'd linger in the C-suite, dropping my data points in casual chats with the CEO, never mentioning my name. I'd overhear him in the break room, recounting a negotiation I'd led with Tokyo, framing it as his victory. "They were tough, but I got them to agree," he'd say, while I stood by the coffee machine, invisible. I didn't confront him. I told myself it didn't matter, that the work was the point, not the credit. But each time, a piece of my trust chipped away, like paint flaking from a wall I'd thought was solid. Looking back, I see how I enabled him, how my belief in teamwork blinded me to his game. In America, we're taught to lift others up, to share the stage, especially as women in corporate spaces. I'd read the articles, attended the seminars. Don't be too assertive, don't hog the spotlight, be collaborative. I took it to heart, stepping aside so Nathan could shine, thinking it would strengthen our project. But Nathan wasn't collaborating, he was collecting. My notes, my insights, my relationships with clients, they were tools he wielded to build his own image, while I stayed in the background, the unseen architect of a deal he was preparing to claim. The weight of that realization hit me as I sipped my coffee, the office lobby blurring around me. I'd been so focused on the $25 million contract, on the clean energy it would bring, that I hadn't seen Nathan's ambition casting a shadow over my work. He wasn't learning from me. He was positioning himself to erase me. The pay cut email, I now suspected, wasn't random. It was a move in a larger plan, one where Nathan stood at the podium and I was pushed out the door. But he didn't know everything. He didn't know that the client, Hiroko in Tokyo, trusted me, not him. He didn't know that I held the final compliance documents, the ones only I could sign. He thought he was winning, but he was standing on a foundation I'd built, and I wasn't ready to let it crumble. I stepped into the elevator, my reflection sharper now, my resolve growing. Nathan's shadow was long, but shadows only exist where there's light. I was that light, the woman who'd carried this project through every storm, who'd earned the client's trust with every late-night call. As the doors closed, I made a promise to myself. I'd keep doing the work, but I'd stop giving Nathan the stage. If you're reading this, pause and think. When have you let someone else take credit for your light? Write down one way you can shine without apology. For me, that moment was coming, and as the elevator rose, I felt it. The spark of a fight I was ready to win. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd built a $25 million renewable energy contract from scratch, and yet, someone had decided I was worth less. As I stepped into the elevator, my reflection in the glass doors looked steady, but beneath my pressed blazer, questions churned. Who had sent that email? And why now, when the deal was days from signing? The answer, I suspected, was waiting on the 14th floor, in the form of Nathan Brooks. Nathan had arrived 6 months ago, a new executive with a handshake that lingered and a smile that seemed to promise everything. He was all polished, tailored suits, a voice that carried without effort, the kind of charisma that made people lean in. At first, I welcomed him. I was 32, a project manager who thrived on details, not spotlight, and I thought his energy could amplify our work. The renewable energy contract was my lifeblood, a year-long labor to bring clean power to rural communities. I'd spent countless nights on calls with Tokyo, navigated legal tangles in London, and built trust with clients who now called me by my first name. Nathan's arrival felt like a chance to share the load, to turn my quiet competence into something the whole company could see. I was wrong. It started subtly, like a shadow creeping across a sunlit room. Nathan began attending my project meetings, sitting at the far end of the table, nodding thoughtfully as I presented updates. He'd ask for my notes afterward, saying he wanted to stay in the loop. I'd email them, meticulous as always, thinking he was learning the ropes. He'd drop by my desk, leaning casually against the partition, asking about client preferences or delivery timelines. "You're the expert, Lauren," he'd say, his smile wide, but his eyes never quite meeting mine. I took it as flattery, proof that my work was valued. I didn't notice how he used my answers, how he'd parrot my insights in executive briefings, his voice louder, his gestures bolder, as if the ideas were his own. The first real clue came during a critical pitch in London, 3 months ago. We'd flown across the Atlantic to meet the client's board, a group of sharp-eyed executives who held the fate of our $25 million deal. I'd prepped for weeks, building a 60-slide deck that mapped every risk, every opportunity. I knew the numbers: cold carbon offsets, grid capacities, community impact. The meeting was virtual, but we'd rented a sleek conference room in London's Canary Wharf to present from, the Thames glittering outside. I was ready to lead, my notes spread across the table like a battle plan. Then Nathan walked in, his suit pristine, his cologne sharp. "Lauren," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, "you've done the groundwork. Mind if I take the lead? I think they'll respond to a fresh voice." His tone was warm, almost conspiratorial, like we were partners in a grand plan. The Seattle dawn broke softly, painting the sky above Lake Union in hues of pink and gold. I stood at my apartment window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the city stir to life. Ferries cut gentle wakes across the water, and the distant hum of morning traffic rose from Westlake Avenue. It was Monday, 3 days since the email that had shattered my world. "Effective immediately. Your salary is reduced by 35%. "Yeah, tough call," he said, his tone breezy. "Budget stuff, you know. Quarter-end pressures. Leadership's tightening belts before we close this big deal. Nothing personal." His words rushed out, filling the space I left empty. I said nothing. I stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, my expression calm. He waited, expecting me to protest, to plead, to give him something to work with. I gave him silence. His eyes darted away, just for a moment, and I saw it discomfort, maybe even fear. He was used to charming his way through, to talking over people like me, but silence? Silence was something he couldn't control. In that moment, I understood something profound. In corporate America, we're taught to speak, to advocate, to fill every gap with words. But silence can shift the room. It forces others to reveal themselves, to squirm under the weight of their own choices. Nathan kept talking, his voice a little too fast. "It's temporary, Lauren. You're still key to this project. We'll sort it out after the signing." Still, I said nothing. I watched the way his fingers tightened around his pen, the way his smile didn't reach his eyes. He was selling me a story, but I wasn't buying it anymore. The pay cut wasn't about budgets. It was about removal, a quiet push to make me fade before the cameras rolled for the contract signing. But I wasn't fading. I was standing right here, and I was paying attention. I nodded once, a small gesture, and turned to leave. "Thanks for the update," I said, my voice as steady as the rain that had started falling again outside. Nathan looked surprised, then relieved, like I'd passed some test he'd set. "You're steady, Lauren," he called after me. "Always have been. Steady. Not brilliant. Not essential. Just steady." The word stung, but it also clarified something. He thought he could predict me, control me, keep me in my place. He was wrong. As I walked back to my desk, the office noise faded into a distant hum. I felt a shift, like the ground beneath me was steadying after days of shaking. Silence wasn't just a reaction, it was a strategy. By saying less, I could see more. I noticed how Nathan's assistant avoided my gaze, how the legal team's emails were suddenly vague about the contract's final steps. I saw the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Nathan was positioning himself to take credit for the $25 million deal, and the pay cut was his way of clearing the stage. But he didn't know what I knew. The client in Tokyo, Hiroko, trusted me, not him. The final compliance documents, the ones only I could sign, were still in my hands. He could cast his shadow, but I held the light. That afternoon, I walked to a small park near the office, the kind tucked between skyscrapers where Seattleites escape for a moment of green. I sat on a bench, the rain a soft mist now, and closed my eyes. I let the silence settle around me, not the tense kind from Nathan's office, but the kind that felt like strength. I thought about every time I'd spoken up to save the project, every time I'd let Nathan take the lead, every time I'd trusted the system to see me. Silence was my way of reclaiming that trust, not in others, but in myself. I wasn't going to fight on their terms. I was going to win on mine. If you're reading this, take a moment. Think about a time you felt pressured to speak, to prove yourself, to fill the quiet. Try this. The next time you're in a tense moment, pause. Let the silence stretch. See what it reveals. For me, it revealed Nathan's unease, his overconfidence, his underestimation of me. As I walked back to the office, the Seattle rain on my face, I knew one thing. Silence was my weapon, and I was ready to wield it. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd built a $25 million renewable energy contract from the ground up, the woman who'd believed hard work would be her shield. Now, I knew better. The betrayal wasn't just a pay cut. It was a message that I was disposable, a pawn in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. But as I sipped my coffee, a quiet resolve settled in my chest. I wasn't going to scream or storm out. I was going to walk into that office, and I was going to let silence be my weapon. The 14th floor office was already buzzing when I arrived, the air thick with the clatter of keyboards and the scent of fresh coffee from the break room. My colleagues glanced up, their smiles fleeting, unaware of the bomb that had detonated in my inbox. I wore my usual navy blazer, my hair pulled back in a low bun, every detail signaling business as usual. But inside, I was different. The email had cracked something open, not just pain but clarity. I'd spent a year pouring my soul into this contract, late nights with Tokyo, marathon sessions in London, handwritten notes that won the client's trust. I'd let Nathan Brooks, the charming new executive, take credit for my work, believing we were a team. Now, I saw his shadow for what it was, a calculated move to erase me. The pay cut wasn't random. It was his handiwork, or at least his approval, and I wasn't going to let him win without a fight. I settled at my desk, the Seattle skyline framed by the window, and opened my laptop. Emails flooded in, client queries, legal updates, the usual chaos of a deal nearing its close. I answered them methodically, my responses crisp, my tone unchanged. To the outside world, I was Lauren Carter, steady and reliable. But beneath the surface, I was watching, listening, choosing my moments. I'd always been quick to speak up, to fix problems, to fill gaps. Now, I held back. Silence, I realized, wasn't weakness. It was power. It was the pause before a storm, the space where truth could grow. My first test came at 10 a.m., when I knocked on Nathan's office door. He looked up from his phone, his tie loosened, his smile as polished as ever. "Lauren," he said, his voice warm like we were old friends grabbing lunch at Pike Place. "Come in. Everything okay?" The question hung in the air, a trap disguised as concern. He knew about the email. He had to. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the quiet room. "I saw the salary notice," I said, my voice even, my eyes locked on his. For a split second, his smile faltered, a crack in his perfect facade. Then he leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. The picture of ease. The Seattle night was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against my office window. It was late, past 9 p.m., and the 14th floor was empty, the hum of daytime chaos replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room, illuminating the skyline beyond Pike Place's neon glow, the Space Needle standing sentinel in the distance. My mind raced, weighing the ethics of what I'd found. Part of me wanted to fire off an email to legal, to flag the error and protect the deal. That was the Lauren of a week ago, the one who believed in fixing problems, in saving the team. But the new Lauren, the one burned by that email, saw something else. Nathan's version was a ticking bomb, and he didn't even know it. Hiroko hadn't signed yet. She was waiting for my compliance notes, the ones only I could provide. I could correct his mistake, save him, and keep the project on track. Or I could wait, let his lie surface, and protect what I'd built. The choice wasn't easy, but it was clear. I wasn't here to clean up his mess. I was here to reclaim my power. I printed my version of the contract, the clean one, and slipped it into a locked drawer beneath my desk. Nathan's version I left untouched on the shared drive, a digital landmine waiting for the right moment. I powered down my laptop, the screen fading to black, and stood, my reflection faint in the window. The city outside was alive, its lights blurring through the rain. Each one a story of struggle and survival. I felt like I was waking up, seeing the game for the first time. Nathan thought he could erase me, but he'd forgotten one thing. I was the firewall, the one who'd built the deal brick by brick, the one Hiroko trusted. He could cut my pay, but he couldn't cut my truth. As I left the office, the elevator's hum was a quiet anthem. I thought about the American workplace, how we're taught to document everything: emails, meetings, contributions. It's not just bureaucracy, it's survival. Every file I'd saved, every note I'd kept, was a shield now, proof of my work in a world quick to forget. I'd been naive, trusting Nathan to share the stage, but naivety wasn't weakness. It was a lesson, one I'd learned in time to act. I stepped into the Seattle night, the rain cool on my face, and felt a surge of purpose. I wasn't just holding a contract, I was holding the truth, and truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it's buried. I walked toward my car, parked near the Olympic Sculpture Park, where steel forms loomed like silent guardians. I paused, letting the moment settle. This discovery wasn't just about Nathan's mistake, it was about my strength. I'd spent a year building trust, not just with Hiroko but with myself. Every late-night call, every revised clause, every solved crisis had forged something unbreakable. Nathan could try to rewrite the story, but I held the original, and I wasn't going to let it go. If you're reading this, stop for a moment. Think about a time you found proof of your worth: a file, a thank you note, a project you nailed. Save it, not just on your computer, but in your heart. That's your truth, your anchor when the world tries to push you aside. For me, it was 82 pages of a contract, locked in a drawer, waiting for its moment. As I drove home, Seattle's lights fading in my rear view, I knew one thing: the truth was mine, and I was ready to let it speak. 4 days had passed since the email that shook my world. Effective immediately, your salary is reduced by 35%. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd built a $25 million renewable energy contract from nothing, and that betrayal had forced me to see the truth. Nathan Brooks, the charming executive who'd taken credit for my work, wasn't just a shadow, he was a threat. But tonight, as I sifted through project files, I found something that shifted the game entirely, a truth that could change everything. I'd started the evening with a simple task: double-checking the contract's compliance clauses for our Tokyo client, Hiroko. The deal was days from signing, and I'd learned to trust my instincts, to verify every detail. But as I navigated the company's shared drive, my cursor hovered over a folder labeled Contract, Drafts, Final. It was one I'd seen Nathan access during a meeting, his fingers moving quickly, his smile too casual. I clicked it open, expecting to find my version of the contract, the one I'd spent months refining, legally sound, approved by counsel, ready for Hiroko's signature. Instead, I found 2 files. One titled LC Final Approved, and another NB Draft Sent. My initials. His. My heart quickened, a pulse of intuition urging me forward. I opened my version first. There it was, 82 pages of precision, every clause vetted, every timeline balanced, every carbon offset figure backed by data. This was the contract I'd built, the one that had won Hiroko's trust through late-night calls and meticulous revisions. I'd handwritten the final compliance notes, a client request that ensured legal integrity, notes only I could finalize. I exhaled, reassured by its familiar weight. Then, I opened Nathan's file, and the air left the room. It was a contract, yes, but it wasn't mine. The timelines were compressed phase 1 set for May 1st, not the 15th of July, as Hiroko had agreed. The carbon offsets were inflated, promising numbers we couldn't deliver. Entire sections were unvetted, untouched by legal, a patchwork of ambition and error. And the worst part? The metadata showed Nathan had sent this version to Hiroko 2 weeks ago, without review, without my knowledge. I leaned back, my chair creaking in the silence. The Seattle rain fell harder now, a steady drumbeat mirroring my thoughts. Nathan hadn't just taken credit for my work. He'd rewritten it, gambling with a $25 million deal to claim a faster win. He'd bypassed me, the legal team, the process I'd built, and sent a flawed contract to a client who valued trust above all. I could picture him, his polished smile, his voice assuring Hiroko it was final, while I sat in the dark, holding the real version. The audacity was staggering. But so was the opportunity. This wasn't just a mistake. It was leverage. A truth that could unravel his carefully constructed facade. The Seattle sky was a canvas of gray, heavy clouds rolling over Elliott Bay as I walked through Pike Place Market on Thursday morning. The air carried the sharp tang of fresh fish and the warm aroma of coffee from vendors calling out to early commuters. It was 3 days until the signing of the $25 million renewable energy contract, a deal I'd built over a year of sleepless nights and relentless precision. I left the meeting and walked to Gasworks Park, a place where Seattle's industrial past met its green future. Rusted machinery framed by grassy hills. The view of the city skyline steadied me, the Space Needle a reminder of resilience. I sat on a bench, the wind cool against my face, and let my thoughts settle. This moment, this calm before the storm, was about more than the contract. It was about who I was becoming. The Lauren of a year ago would have rushed to fix Nathan's mistake, to save the deal at any cost. But the Lauren sitting here, watching ferries glide across Lake Union, understood something new. Protecting my work meant protecting myself. I wasn't just a project manager. I was the architect of this deal, and I deserved to be seen. The American workplace often glorifies the loudest voice, the one who commands the room. But I was learning that quiet competence could be louder. That preparation could outshine performance. Nathan's ceremony was a stage, but I held the script. I'd spent a year earning Hiroko's trust, from memorizing her name's inflection to revising clauses at 3 a.m. Nathan had charm, but I had substance, and substance endures. I pulled out my phone and opened a note I'd started writing. When have you stayed calm under pressure? How did it shape the outcome? It was a question for me, but also for anyone who'd ever felt overlooked. Calm wasn't passivity. It was power, the kind that waited for the right moment to act. Back at the office, I reviewed my contract one last time, its pages a testament to my work. I checked the shared drive, confirming Nathan's version was still there, untouched, a digital trap he'd set for himself. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The signing was Saturday, and Hiroko would see the truth soon enough. Nathan's assistant stopped by my desk, nervous, asking for a backup of the contract. I handed her a USB with Nathan's version, my face neutral. "This is what he sent," I said. She nodded, unaware she was carrying a flaw that could undo him. I watched her walk away, my heart steady. I wasn't sabotaging. I was letting Nathan's choices speak for themselves. As I left the office, the Seattle dusk was settling, the city's lights twinkling like stars against the gray. I felt a surge of clarity, not just about the deal, but about my place in the world. I'd been raised to believe that teamwork meant sacrifice, that stepping back was strength. But now, I saw the cost of that belief. I'd let Nathan take the stage, and he'd used it to push me out. No more. I was done dimming my light. The ceremony was coming, and with it, a moment to stand in my truth. If you're reading this, pause. Think about a time you held back to let someone else shine, only to feel erased. Write down one way you can stand in your truth without fear. For me, that truth was a contract, a year of work, a promise to myself. As I walked home, the Seattle rain soft on my shoulders. I knew one thing. The storm was near, and I was ready to let it break. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd turned a dream of clean energy into reality, and yet I carried a secret heavier than the clouds above. 5 days ago, an email had slashed my salary by 35%. A betrayal I now knew was tied to Nathan Brooks, the executive who'd been stealing my spotlight. But last night, I'd uncovered his fatal mistake of flawed contract he'd sent to our Tokyo client Hiroko without my approval. As I sipped a latte, watching tourists snap photos of the market's iconic sign, I felt a quiet strength settling in. The storm was coming, but I was ready, and Nathan had no idea what was waiting. The office on 3rd Avenue was a hive of anticipation when I arrived. Banners for the signing ceremony were being unfurled, branded with our company's logo and buzzwords like sustainability and innovation. Nathan had chosen a venue near Pike Place, a sleek event space with views of the waterfront, meant to impress the press and our client, Hiroko. He was in his element, striding through the 14th floor with a clipboard, directing staff to polish every detail glassware for champagne, lighting for the cameras, even a playlist of upbeat jazz to set the mood. His confidence was magnetic, his smile a beacon that drew everyone in. To them, he was the leader of this $25 million deal, the one who'd brought it home. To me, he was a man standing on a fault line, unaware it was about to split. I kept my head down, my navy blazer crisp, my responses to emails as steady as ever. Colleagues rushed past, caught in the pre-ceremony frenzy, but I moved with purpose, my silence a shield. I'd learned to wield it since confronting Nathan, watching his unease when I refused to fill the quiet with protests. Now, silence was my ally, letting me observe the cracks in his plan. I knew what he didn't. His contract, the one he'd sent to Hiroko, was a house of cards timelines too tight, carbon offsets fabricated, legal approval absent. My version, the real one, sat locked in my desk drawer, 82 pages of truth I'd crafted through months of calls to Tokyo and London. Hiroko trusted me, not Nathan, and she was waiting for my handwritten compliance notes, the final key to the deal. I held that key, and I wasn't ready to turn it. Nathan's overconfidence was almost theatrical. At a planning meeting that afternoon, he stood at the head of the conference room, gesturing to a mock-up of the signing table. "This is our moment," he said, his voice booming. "We're not just closing a deal, we're shaping the future." The room applauded, caught in his spell. I sat near the back, my notebook open, my pen still. He didn't mention me, didn't acknowledge the year I'd spent building the deal he was claiming. I felt a flicker of anger, but I let it pass. Anger was loud. I needed to be quiet, precise, like the Seattle rain that fell softly but reshaped the earth over time. Nathan thought he'd won, but he was building his victory on a lie, and lies have a way of crumbling. The Seattle morning was electric, the kind of Saturday where the city seemed to hold its breath. Pike Place Market buzzed just blocks away, but inside the sleek event space overlooking Elliott Bay, a different energy pulsed. It was the day of the $25 million renewable energy contract signing, a deal I'd built over a year of late nights, Tokyo calls, and London negotiations. "Just to confirm," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "this timeline reflects our revised agreement from last month?" Nathan blinked, his smile faltering for a heartbeat. "Absolutely," he said, his tone too quick. "It's all aligned." Hiroko's eyes narrowed. "Because this says May 1st for Phase 1, she continued, her words deliberate. "We agreed on the 15th of July, with a grace period. That's not here." The room froze. The jazz quartet's notes faded, replaced by a heavy silence. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. The legal counsel shifted, his hands tightening on his briefcase. Nathan's assistant fumbled with her tablet, her face pale. "It's a formatting issue," Nathan said, his voice strained now. "An outdated copy, maybe. We'll pull the right one." Hiroko raised a hand, her gesture final. "I don't sign on assumptions," she said. The air shifted, like the moment before a wave crashes. Nathan turned to his assistant, his eyes desperate, but she had nothing to offer. The ceremony was unraveling, and I stood still, my breath even, my silence louder than ever. Then I stepped forward. Not with drama, not with anger, just 3 measured steps to the table. I looked at Hiroko, the woman I'd worked with for a year, the one who knew my voice across countless calls. "This version wasn't approved," I said. My voice clear, steady. "I recommend we pause the signing." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the room. Hiroko's eyes met mine. And for the first time that day, I felt C not as a background figure, but as the architect of this deal. She nodded, a single, deliberate motion. "Thank you, Lauren," she said, her voice firm. She closed the folder, her jaw tight, and turned to Nathan. "I want the approved version, sent directly from legal. Until then, we're done." The room shattered. Cameras stopped flashing. Executives exchanged panicked glances. Nathan's face drained of color, his charm useless now. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I stood still, my clipboard at my side, my heart a steady drum. This wasn't vengeance, it was correction, a moment to protect what I'd built. The press began to pack up, whispering headlines. The champagne sat untouched, the jazz quartet playing to an empty stage. Hiroko and her team left without ceremony, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Nathan followed, his voice a desperate murmur. But it was too late. The signing that was meant to crown him had collapsed, and I'd been the one to pull the thread. As the room emptied, Nathan approached me, his eyes wild. "What the hell, Lauren?" he hissed, his voice low. I met his gaze, unflinching. I corrected the record. I said, my words simple, final. Then I turned and walked away, past the abandoned tables, past the banners now sagging in defeat. The Seattle sun broke through the clouds outside, casting light across the bay. I felt centered, not angry, not triumphant, but whole. I hadn't needed to shout or scheme. I'd spoken the truth, and the lie had fallen apart under its own weight. If you're reading this, think about a moment you spoke up, even when it was hard. Write down what it taught you about your strength. For me, it was this. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a voice, and mine was enough. As I stepped into the Seattle air, the city alive around me, I knew one thing. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd poured my soul into this work, only to be betrayed by a 35% pay cut, and an executive, Nathan Brooks, who'd claimed my spotlight. But I held a secret. Nathan had sent a flawed contract to our client, Hiroko, and I had the real one, locked in my desk with compliance notes only I could finalize. As I stood in the venue's lobby, a clipboard in hand, watching the ceremony unfold, I knew the storm I'd prepared for was about to break. The room was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Puget Sound, sunlight glinting off the water. Tables were draped in white linen, adorned with branded pens and velvet folders. Champagne chilled in silver buckets, and a jazz quartet played softly, their notes mingling with the murmur of reporters and executives. Nathan was the star, his navy suit tailored to perfection, his tie pin catching the light as he greeted guests. He shook hands with the press, his smile wide, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed he'd won. To the world, he was the face of this deal, the leader who'd brought clean energy to thousands. To me, he was a man standing on a lie, and I was the only one who knew it. I stayed on the sidelines, my blazer pressed, my expression neutral. The clipboard was a prop, a way to blend into the chaos without drawing eyes. I'd learned the power of silence over the past week, using it to observe Nathan's overconfidence, to let his flawed contract a rushed draft, with impossible timelines and fake carbon offset slinger untouched on the shared drive. Hiroko, our Tokyo client, was waiting for my handwritten compliance notes, the final piece of the real contract I'd locked away. Nathan didn't know, didn't suspect, that his victory was built on sand. I watched him pose for photos, his laughter echoing, and felt a calm resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, and truth has a way of cutting through the noise. Hiroko and her team arrived at 10 a.m., their presence commanding the room. She was all efficiency, her dark suit sharp, her eyes scanning the space with the precision of someone who missed nothing. I'd spent a year earning her trust, from pronouncing her name correctly to revising clauses at 3 a.m. She nodded at me as she passed, a small gesture that grounded me. Nathan greeted her, his handshake lingering, his voice overly warm. I stayed still, my clipboard pressed to my hip, my heart steady. The ceremony began with Nathan's speech, a polished performance about shaping the future and global impact. He thanked the company, the legal team, even the caterers, but my name was absent. I didn't flinch. I'd expected it. Hiroko took her seat at the signing table, the velvet folder open before her. She flipped through the contract, Nathan's version, the one he'd sent without approval. Page 1, page 2, her fingers steady, her face unreadable. Then, on page 7, she paused. Her brow furrowed, a subtle shift that sent a ripple through the room. The Seattle afternoon was quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm. The signing ceremony for the $25 million renewable energy contract, meant to be a triumph, had collapsed hours ago in a waterfront venue near Pike Place Market. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd built this deal over a year of late-night calls to Tokyo and marathon sessions in London, only to be betrayed by a 35% pay cut and an executive, Nathan Brooks, who'd tried to claim my work. They had no response, no reprimand, no thank you. I didn't need one. I'd spoken my truth at the ceremony, and that was enough. I slid my resignation across the table, their eyes widening slightly. "You're leaving?" the HR manager asked. Her tone caught between surprise and respect. I nodded, offering nothing more. I stood, shook their hands, and walked out, my steps light despite the weight of the moment. As I passed Nathan's office, the blinds still drawn, I felt a flicker of closure. He'd tried to erase me, but I'd rewritten the story. The elevator doors closed, and I descended, leaving behind a year of late nights, a desk littered with coffee stains, and a company that hadn't seen me until it was too late. Outside, I crossed the Fremont Bridge, the Seattle skyline, shimmering in the late afternoon light. The water below reflected the clouds, a mirror of my own clarity. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving a version of myself, the one who'd believed loyalty would protect her, who'd dimmed her light to let others shine. The pay cut, Nathan's betrayal, the flawed contract they'd forced me to see my worth, not as a cog in a machine, but as a woman who'd built something extraordinary. I'd spent a year earning Hiroko's trust, crafting a deal that could power communities, and no one could take that from me. Walking away wasn't defeat, it was liberation, a step toward a life where I'd choose my own terms. In America, we're often told to stay, to fight, to prove ourselves in spaces that don't value us. But there's power in leaving, in saying, I deserve better. I'd seen it in friends who'd left toxic jobs, in stories of women who'd walked away from companies that overlooked them. My resignation wasn't loud, but it was mine, a quiet act of defiance that echoed louder than any speech. I thought about every moment I'd given to this deal, every 3 a.m. call, every revised clause, every smile I'd earned from Hiroko. Those moments were my foundation, and I was ready to build something new. If you're reading this, pause. Think about a time you walked away from something that no longer served you, a job, a relationship, a belief. Write down one thing you gained from that choice. For me, it was freedom, not just from the office, but from the need to be seen by people who'd never truly looked. As I drove across the bridge, Seattle's skyline fading behind me, I felt it, a lightness, a certainty that whatever came next, I'd face it as Lauren Carter, the woman who'd stood in her truth and walked away while the storm settled. The headlines would fade, Nathan's name would vanish, but my story, my real story, was just beginning. But I'd held the truth of flawless contract locked in my desk, while Nathan's flawed version, riddled with errors, had unraveled under the scrutiny of our client, Hiroko. My calm intervention. This version wasn't approved. I recommend we pause the signing, had stopped the ceremony, exposing Nathan's lie. Now, as I stood in the office lobby on 3rd Avenue, watching the city hum beyond the glass doors, I felt a new kind of freedom taking root, one that would carry me far from this place. The fallout was swift and merciless. By noon, the venue was empty. The velvet folders cleared, the champagne carts wheeled away unopened. Hiroko and her team had left without a handshake, their parting words to the PR team cutting like a blade. We don't move forward with partners who lack internal consistency. It was a polite way of saying trust was broken, and Nathan's name was tied to the failure. Reporters, who'd arrived expecting a feel-good story, were already filing headlines. $25 million clean energy deal stalls in Seattle, one read. Contract mismatch halts major signing, said another. The industry wires buzzed, and by 2 p.m., whispers of legal oversight were circling, with Nathan's name unspoken but implied. He'd chased after Hiroko, his voice desperate as he tried to salvage the moment, but his charm, once his greatest weapon, was useless now. The mask had slipped, and the man behind it was unraveling. Back at the office, the 14th floor was a different kind of chaos. Staff huddled in corners, their voices low, their eyes darting toward Nathan's office. His door was closed, but through the glass, I saw him pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his tie loosened, his confidence gone. Two men in dark, suits likely from legal or risk management entered, and the blinds snapped shut. An investigation was coming, the kind that follows a public fall. I felt no glee, no urge to gloat. Nathan had built his own trap, and I'd simply let him step into it. My focus was elsewhere, on a decision I'd been shaping since the ceremony's collapse. It was time to leave. I sat at my desk, the Seattle skyline, a quiet backdrop, and opened a blank document. My resignation letter was simple, one sentence that carried the weight of a year's worth of work and betrayal. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position. No accusations, no explanations, just clarity. I printed it, slipped it into a plain white envelope, and sealed it with a steady hand. I didn't CC anyone, didn't forward the pay cut email, didn't clear my desk. I'd already taken what mattered, my contract drafts, my notes, my truth weeks ago, stored safely on an encrypted drive at home. The office held nothing for me now, only echoes of a trust I'd misplaced. At 3 p.m., I was called to HR. The meeting room was stark, the air heavy with unspoken questions. The head of legal, a compliance officer, and a man I didn't recognize. His pen moving furiously across a notepad sat across from me. They asked if I'd known about Nathan's flawed contract. Yes, I said, my voice even. They asked why I hadn't stopped the signing sooner. I paused, then answered truthfully, because no one asked me to be part of it. The room went quiet, their faces unreadable. The Seattle evening was soft, the kind of twilight where the city seemed to glow from within. I sat at a corner table in a cozy cafe on Capitol Hill, the air rich with the scent of roasted coffee and freshly baked scones. Outside, the streets hummed with life students laughing, streetlights flickering on, the distant silhouette of the Space Needle cutting through the dusk. In America, we're often told success comes from climbing ladders, from fitting into systems that reward volume over value. But I was learning a different truth. Real success is building something on your own terms. The rise of freelancing, of women leaving corporate cages to chart their own paths, wasn't just a trend. It was a revolution. I thought of friends who'd gone solo, of stories I'd read about consultants thriving without middlemen. Hiroko's offer wasn't just a job. It was an invitation to join that movement, to work without Nathan's shadow, without a company that cut my pay to cut me out. As I sat in the cafe, watching Seattle's dusk deepen, I felt part of something bigger, a shift toward valuing substance over show. I opened a notebook and jotted down 3 goals. Lead with integrity, build trust, create impact. They weren't for Hiroko or any client. They were for me, a compass for this new chapter. I'd spent a year chasing approval, dimming my light to let Nathan shine. Now, I was done with that. I'd work with clients who saw me, projects that aligned with my values, spaces where my voice didn't need to compete. The cafe's hum baristas calling orders, couples laughing felt like a soundtrack to my resolve. I wasn't starting over. I was starting anew, with every lesson, every late-night call, every moment of truth as my foundation. Seattle had always been my home, its gray skies and green hills a mirror of my resilience. I thought of the Fremont Bridge, where I'd walked after resigning, feeling the weight of a year lift. That moment, like this one, was about choice. I could have stayed, fought for scraps of recognition in a company that didn't value me. Instead, I'd chosen myself, and Hiroko's call was proof that choice mattered. I closed my laptop, the contract sent, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the city alive with possibility. I walked toward Volunteer Park, its paths winding through cedars, and let the moment settle. This was my new beginning. Not a gift from anyone, but a path I'd carved. If you're reading this, stop for a moment. Think about a time you chose yourself, left a job, set a boundary, took a risk. Write down one goal that aligns with your values, not someone else's expectations. For me, it was leading with integrity. And as I stood in the park, Seattle's skyline glowing in the distance, I felt it. A steadiness that no pay cut, no betrayal could shake. I wasn't just a consultant. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd built a $25 million deal and walked away when it was time. The past was behind me, Nathan's name fading with it. The future was here, and it was mine to write. It was 1 week since I'd walked away from my job, from the $25 million renewable energy contract I'd built, from the betrayal of a 35% pay cut and an executive, Nathan Brooks, who'd tried to erase me. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd stopped a flawed signing ceremony with a single truth. This version wasn't approved. Now, as I sipped a chai latte, my laptop opened to a new email. I felt something I hadn't in years: steadiness. Not from external validation, but from within. A new beginning was unfolding, and it was mine to shape. The call had come yesterday, as I stood in my apartment overlooking Lake Union, unpacking the weight of my resignation. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was unmistakable. Hiroko, the Tokyo client I'd spent a year building trust with. There was no small talk, no pretense, just her calm, direct tone cutting through the line. "We're re-engaging the project," she said. "But not with your company. We want to work independently, and we want you to lead it. As a consultant, not an employee." My breath caught, not from surprise, but from recognition. A week ago, I might have hesitated, questioned whether I was ready, whether Nathan or my former company would approve. But now, standing in the light of my own truth, I didn't waver. "I accept," I said, my voice as steady as the Seattle rain falling outside. It wasn't excitement. It was certainty, the kind that comes when you know exactly who you are. The email in front of me now was the contract, sent directly from Hiroko's team. My name was at the top: Lauren Carter, independent consultant with terms I'd negotiated, a rate that reflected my worth, and a scope that mirrored the deal I'd crafted over a year of late nights and London flights. I read every line, not out of distrust, but out of respect for the precision I'd honed. There were no hidden clauses, no backdoor edits, just clarity. I signed it digitally, my cursor hovering for a moment before clicking send. The act felt different from the countless signatures I'd given my old company. This wasn't about proving myself. It was about owning myself. As the confirmation pinged, I leaned back, the cafe's warmth wrapping around me like a promise. I was no longer the woman waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I'd built my own. This moment was more than a job offer. It was a rebirth. For a year, I'd poured my soul into a contract that could power communities, believing my loyalty would be rewarded. Nathan's betrayal, the pay cut, the flawed contract he'd sent to Hiroko, they'd forced me to see the lie in that belief. But they'd also shown me my strength. I'd earned Hiroko's trust through every 3 a.m. call, every handwritten compliance note, every crisis I'd solved. When I spoke up at the signing, stopping Nathan's lie, I wasn't just protecting the deal. I was claiming my place. Hiroko's words echoed in my mind. "We want the woman who kept us honest. Not the woman who stayed late, not the woman who sacrificed, but the woman who brought competence, integrity, and impact." For the first time, I felt seen, not for what I gave, but for who I was. The Seattle skyline sparkled under a rare winter sun, its light dancing across the waters of Puget Sound, as I stood at the observation deck of the Space Needle. It was a crisp January morning, 3 months since I'd walked away from the company that had betrayed me, from the $25 million renewable energy contract I'd built, from a 35% pay cut meant to erase me. The second lesson was about value. For too long, I'd believed being indispensable would protect me. I'd stayed late, answered 3 a.m. calls, smoothed cultural gaps with Tokyo and London, thinking my effort would be my shield. But Nathan's betrayal, the pay cut, showed me the flaw in that belief. Value isn't what you give to others. It's what you claim for yourself. When I resigned, when I accepted Hiroko's offer to consult, I wasn't just leaving a job. I was claiming my worth. I thought of the American dream, the one that says hard work guarantees security. It's a half-truth. Work matters. But so does knowing when to walk away, when to demand a seat that fits you. My new office, my contracts, my terms, they were proof that value starts within. The third lesson was resilience. The pay cut hurt, not just financially but emotionally, a wound that made me question my place. But every step uncovering Nathan's flawed contract, speaking at the signing, resigning, rebuilding, showed me I was stronger than the pain. Resilience isn't about avoiding hurt. It's about moving through it, about finding light in the gray. Seattle, with its endless rain and sudden sun, taught me that. I'd walked the Fremont Bridge after resigning, driven past Gasworks Park, sat in Capitol Hill cafes, each place a marker of my growth. Resilience was in the quiet moments. The choice to keep going, to build something new. The final lesson was community. I'd once thought success was solitary, a race to prove myself. But Hiroko's trust, my colleagues' quiet nods after the signing, the barista who knew my order reminded me that no one thrives alone. I wanted to give back, to create spaces where others could shine. I'd started a monthly meetup for freelancers in Seattle, held at a bookstore near Volunteer Park. We shared stories, swapped tips, built a network that valued substance over flash. It wasn't just networking, it was connection, a way to say, you're not alone in this. I thought of starting a book club too. Reading stories of resilience, maybe hidden figures or becoming too, spark conversations about truth and worth. As I stood at the Space Needle, the city sprawling below, I felt these lessons weave together. Truth, value, resilience, community. They weren't just ideas. They were my roadmap. I didn't need to be necessary to people who didn't see me. I needed to be essential to those who did. Hiroko saw me, not as a cog, but as a leader. My clients saw me, not as a shadow, but as a partner. And I saw myself, not as the woman who'd been betrayed, but as Lauren Carter, the one who'd built a deal, a career, a life. If you're reading this, pause. Think about a time you felt overlooked, erased, or pushed aside. Write down one lesson you've learned about your strength, one truth you'll carry forward. Then share it with a friend, a journal, a stranger at a Seattle cafe. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning. For me, it began with a contract, a betrayal, and a choice to stand in my truth. As I stepped down from the Space Needle, the Seattle sun warming my face, I knew one thing. The future was mine, and I was ready to write it, one honest step at a time. I was Lauren Carter, the woman who'd stopped a flawed signing ceremony with a single truth, who'd chosen to resign and start anew as an independent consultant for my Tokyo client, Hiroko. Now, as I looked out over the City Pike Place market bustling below, the ferries gliding toward Bainbridge Island, I felt a quiet certainty. My journey hadn't just been about a contract or a job. It was about discovering my worth, and the lessons I'd learned were ones I wanted to carry forward, not just for myself, but for anyone who'd ever felt unseen. The past few months had been a whirlwind of building. My consulting work with Hiroko was thriving, each project a chance to lead with integrity, to deliver the kind of impact I'd always believed in. I worked from a small office in Capitol Hill, its windows framing the city's evergreen hills, my desk cluttered with notes and coffee mugs. Client by client, deal by deal, I was crafting a career free from Nathan Brooks' shadow, from middlemen who'd taken my work and called it their own. Nathan was a fading memory now, his name scrubbed from the company's website after the signing's collapse. Headlines had briefly flared $25 million deal fails amid contract errors before settling into silence, the kind reserved for those who promise much and deliver little. The company issued vague press releases about restructuring, but the industry knew the truth. Trust had been broken, and Nathan had been the fracture point. I didn't need revenge, didn't crave his downfall. What I needed, what I found, was clarity. Standing up at the signing saying, this version wasn't approved, wasn't about tearing Nathan down, it was about lifting myself up. I'd spent a year building a contract that could power communities, earning Hiroko's trust through late-night calls to Tokyo, marathon sessions in London, and handwritten compliance notes that sealed the deal. When Nathan tried to claim it, when the company cut my pay to push me out, I could have faded, could have let their story define me. Instead, I chose silence, then truth, and finally freedom. Each choice taught me something profound, lessons I now carried like tools for the future. The first lesson was the power of truth. In corporate America, we're often taught to play the game, to smooth over mistakes, to prioritize optics over honesty. But truth, I learned, is sharper than any performance. When I spoke at the signing, I didn't need to shout or accuse. I simply stated what was real, and Nathan's lie collapsed under its own weight. Truth doesn't always win applause. Sometimes it clears the room, leaves champagne unopened, sends reporters scrambling. But it endures. It's the foundation you build on when everything else falls away. I thought of every email I'd saved, every draft I'd locked in my drawer. Proof of my work in a world quick to forget. Those weren't just files. They were my truth, and they'd carried me here. The Seattle skyline stretched before me, a tapestry of glass and light under a January sun, as I stood at the edge of Cary Park, the city's heartbeat pulsing below. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a far cry from the stormy night 6 months ago when an email had shattered my world. Effective immediately, your salary is reduced by 35%. The lessons from this journey are as clear as the Puget Sound on a sunny day. First, truth is your greatest ally. It doesn't need fanfare, it needs courage. Speaking up at the signing wasn't about drama. It was about integrity, a single sentence that shifted the room. Save your work, document your contributions, hold your truth closets, your shield when others try to rewrite your story. Second, value starts within. I thought being indispensable would protect me, but Nathan's betrayal showed me that worth isn't what you give, it's what you claim. Resigning, choosing myself, was my way of saying I deserved better. Third, resilience is built in the quiet moments. The pay cut hurt, but every step silence, discovery, speaking outforged a strength I didn't know I had. Finally, community matters. Hiroko's trust, my freelancer meetups in Seattle, the barista who knew my order, they reminded me that success is shared, not solitary. For you, living in today's fast-paced world, these lessons are a roadmap. Start with truth. In a workplace obsessed with optics, be the one who speaks honestly, even when it's hard. Keep records of your wins mails, projects, notes not out of paranoia, but pride. Next, claim your value. If your job dims your light, set boundaries or walk away. The gig economy, remote work, freelancing, they're proof you can build a career that fits you. Resilience means embracing the gray days, whether it's a layoff or a setback. Take a walk, like I did at Gasworks Park, and let the quiet rebuild you. And seek community. Start a book club, join a meetup, share your story at a Seattle cafe or a Zoom call. Connection turns struggles into strength. As I stood at Cary Park, the city sprawling below, I saw my journey reflected in Seattle's resilience, its rain, its sun, its constant reinvention. I was no longer the woman waiting for approval, dimming my light for Nathan's stage. I was Lauren Carter, the one who'd built a deal, spoken truth, and chosen freedom. If you've ever felt unseen, know this. Your truth is enough. Your value is yours to claim, and your story is far from over. Write it, live it, share it. The future is waiting. And like the Seattle sun breaking through the clouds, it's yours to shine. I was Lauren Carter, the project manager who'd poured a year of my life into a $25 million renewable energy contract, a deal meant to power communities and prove my worth. That email, cold and unsigned, was the first crack in a foundation I'd thought unbreakable, revealing a betrayal orchestrated by Nathan Brooks, an executive who'd claimed my work as his own. But from that fracture grew a story not of defeat, but of resilience, truth, and a new beginning that redefined who I am and what I'm capable of. My journey began in the quiet hum of a Seattle office, where I built the contract brick by brick. Late-night calls to Tokyo, marathon negotiations in London, handwritten compliance notes that won the trust of our client, Hirokothi's, were my currency, my proof that hard work could shape the future. I believed in the American dream, the one that promised security for those who showed up, stayed late, and gave everything. But Nathan's shadow loomed, his charm and ambition slowly eclipsing my contributions. He took credit for my slides, my insights, my victories, and I let him, thinking teamwork meant sacrifice. When the pay cut landed, it wasn't just about money. It was a message that I was disposable, a pawn in Nathan's plan to claim the deal's glory. That moment, staring at my laptop in the empty office, the Space Needle glowing in the distance, could have broken me. Instead, it woke me up. I chose silence as my weapon. a shift that felt radical in a world that rewards noise. When I confronted Nathan, his breezy dismissal budget stuff, nothing personal crumbled under my steady gaze. Silence forced him to reveal his unease, his overconfidence, his underestimation of me. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Nathan had sent a flawed contract to Hiroko, a rushed draft with impossible timelines and fabricated data, bypassing my vetted version locked in my desk. I could have fixed it, saved him, but I chose to wait, to let his lie surface. The signing ceremony, staged with champagne and jazz near Pike Place Market, was Nathan's moment to shine. But when Hiroko spotted the errors, I stepped forward, my voice clear. This version wasn't approved. I recommend we pause. Those words stopped the ceremony, exposed Nathan's deception, and reclaimed my truth. The room fell silent, the deal stalled, and Nathan's facade collapsed. Walking away was my next act of courage. I resigned with a single sentence. Effective immediately, I resign, leaving behind a company that hadn't seen me until it was too late. Crossing the Fremont Bridge that day, the Seattle skyline behind me, I felt free, not from the job, but from the need to prove myself to those who didn't value me. Nathan faded, his name erased from the company's website, his promises buried under vague press releases. But my story didn't end there. Hiroko called, offering me the chance to lead the project as an independent consultant, on my terms. I signed a contract with my name at the top, working from a Capitol Hill office, building a career client by client, deal by deal. The Space Needle, once a distant symbol of ambition, now felt like a companion, a reminder of how far I'd come,